International news now.
So we're going to start today with an update on the potential deal between President Trump and the Democratic leadership to pass legislation to protect Dreamers, undocumented individuals who were brought to the country illegally as children from being deported. So what are the prospects for a deal that would combine protection for Dreamers and tighter border security, something that the Republicans have long held out for? Arguably, there's room for a compromise here, because although, and this compromise has been elusive for decades in Congress, the first thing to ask, though, is whether there is public support for such a compromise deal. We can see the contours of a possible deal based on the Gallup poll asking respondents to prioritize border security or dealing with undocumented individuals who are already here. In 2014, 51% of respondents chose deal with illegal immigrants currently in the United States, while 46% chose secure the borders. There was also a partisan divide. Republicans preferred securing borders 55 to 42, and the Democrats preferred dealing with immigrants already here on a margin of 59 to 40%. Now, this close split suggests that a compromise that provides something to both sides of this debate could be reached, as long as neither side feels like it's giving up too much. The second aspect of this deal will be the trick, since preferences for either more border security or greater accommodation of immigrants already in the country follow partisan divisions. So there was this meeting last week between President Trump, Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Minority Leader in the House of Representatives, over Chinese takeout in the White House. There was a lot of drama associated with this meeting because afterward, Chuck Schumer declared publicly that they had come to a deal on providing protection against deportation of Dreamers. But President Trump at first denied such a deal, but later confirmed that they were close to a deal. Of course, the true test of whether there's a deal or not will be congressional votes on real pieces of legislation, so let's leave that question aside for now. Instead, we want to briefly explore the constraints for both sides in reaching a deal that seems within grasp, given the level of public support for both allowing the Dreamers to stay in the country and increasing security at the border. Now,
so, I mean, let's just break this down. It makes perfect sense. If you give the one thing that each side wants, it shouldn't be that hard, right? But this is why politics is so hard, because it is a lot harder than it looks because of the base in each of these parties.
Yes.
So
both sides,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So both sides, right, face this similar dilemma, which is disappointing their base. And even there's news today, last night, Nancy Pelosi gave a speech that was attended by many Dreamers in San Francisco, in her home constituency, defending efforts to try and cut a deal for Dreamers, and she was basically screamed and drowned out. And the argument was, we don't want protection just for Dreamers, we want protection for all undocumented immigrants, right? And kids, there were Dreamers that were protesting, and the kids were saying, we don't want our parents to be vulnerable to deportation.
Right. And that's the frame that's going to be a complicating feature of this for the Democrats.
Yeah, right. And so the idea is there's potentially this broad deal that could be done, but already Democratic leaders are facing criticism from their base, and Republican leaders are facing similar criticisms. All right, so when news of a deal with the Democrats became public, Donald Trump immediately took a huge hit from his base. Breitbart News, taking a page straight from Trump's campaign tactics, quickly quickly labeled the president Amnesty Don, and Ann Coulter, another high-profile conservative and immigration hardliner, wondered publicly who didn't want to see President Trump impeached, suggesting that those who believed his campaign promise of building a wall would be severely disappointed with his abandonment of strong limitations on immigration. The Democrats have their own problems with their base. Some want a DACA-only bill and feel that they can force a vote on that during the upcoming battle over the budget at the end of the year. Now, also, there are potential splits within the immigrant community, which currently perceives a deal that pairs protection for Dreamers and increased border security as a policy that would help one group younger immigrants who came as children while harming another group, their parents and older family members who are not part of DACA protections.
Right, and so this is going to be a dilemma for both of them, and it's the kind of dilemma that faces all these sorts of negotiations. You've got a middle in both parties that would be perfectly comfortable with this compromise. I think the leadership represents that on both in Congress, in both parties. I think Paul Ryan would go for this deal. I'm not sure about McConnell, but and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer clearly seem pretty fine with the deal as long as it's not funding for the wall. There's certain hot button issues that they're not going to touch, right? But then, and on the Republican side, they're just not going to go for a DACA-only bill. I mean, I think that would be a bridge too far for the Republican establishment and also Trump's core base. And so the more extreme, if we need to use those terms, elements within both parties that want both of those things could then bring down the whole edifice and nothing gets done. And this is how these compromise and kind of consensus legislation, comprehensive immigration, has always died. This is how it's died over and over and over again. Right?
Well, and the larger, we've talked a little bit about this, one of the challenges for Trump on this is that, and the frustrations that after news of the dinner came out last week, is the frustration at being left out of the table in Republican leadership, right? So by not having them a seat at a table, then they get frustrated. They say, well, you don't get us enough concessions for Republicans that then we can bring back to our members to get them, because remember, it's our job to whip up votes and to get you supportive votes for this. Right. If we aren't sitting at the table and we are being excluded, we can't extract commitments from our member to support these things, which then creates much larger problems for us in terms of managing your legislative priorities more broadly moving forward over the next 3 or 4 months, which brings us to the budget. And the challenge for this is Democrats can't provide enough votes on their own, and they have their own problems with the base. So one way or the other, the Republican leadership has to be brought back in, and it would simply be risky policy making on the part of President and Chuck and Nancy as well if they exclude the Republican leadership from this process, because it's just going to be very hard to drum up those votes.
Right. I mean, if the Republicans go into full opposition mode on this, they could shut the whole thing down. And there would be a political and electoral calculus for doing that. But that would be a really risky venture for them as well, because then they'd have to pretty much label Donald Trump as in league with the Democrats on immigration suddenly, and that's going to be a tricky thing. Now, there's even more mundane problems with the way that this is unfolding for the Republican establishment. I mean, they've made a career, they've had a long electoral record of demonizing Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they have campaign ad after campaign ad, if you don't want Nancy Pelosi running things, vote for us. And now you've got all of these photo ops and all of these images of Donald Trump, their party leader, dealing with Nancy Pelosi. And so running against the left wing of the Democratic Party has just become much harder for them. And it's really interesting when you shift to Trump at the UN, for example, is one of his tactics, it seems to me, is to then tack back to his base on other issues to try to satisfy them, right? And so everyone was afraid he was going to go after the UN to kind of give a salve to those who are kind of smarting about not going after the wall for now and other things. Now, he didn't really do that, which was an interesting development as well.